Cuba is experiencing rare panic this Monday, May 25, 2026, after Raul Castro, the old commander of the Cuban military structure, became a formal target of the United States justice system. The dictatorship tried to react in Havana with an event, music, activists, and a message sent in Raul's name, but the detail that mattered most was precisely his absence. While the propaganda tried to sell the former head of the regime as a symbol of the Cuban family, the people saw a different scene. Castro, hounded by pressure from Trump, protected by silence, surrounded by nervous allies, and distant from the streets he helped control for decades. And that's where the dictatorship's theater starts to fail, because the regime orders people to defend Raul in public but can't clearly explain where he is, why he doesn't appear, or how far the United States can push this pressure campaign. Why does the dictatorship hide the man who claimed to represent the revolution? How did Trump manage to turn the surname Castro into a symbol of fear inside Cuba? I'll tell you all about that in a moment, but right now you'll want to subscribe to the channel to stay well informed with real-time information in the best journalistic quality you've ever seen, with the credibility standard of Milson Alves. The accusation, announced on May 20th, 2026, directly targeted Raul Modesto Castro Ruz, who is now 94 years old, born in Rugim, along with Lorenzo Alberto Perez, Emilio José Palacio Blanco, José Fidel Gual Barzaga, Raúl Simanca Cárdenas, and Luis Raúl González Pardo Rodríguez. According to American authorities, they allegedly took part in the plan linked to the attack on two unarmed civilian aircraft used by Cuban exiles from Miami. The interpretation in Cuba is serious because this is not an ordinary sanction, nor is it diplomatic rhetoric. It is a formal criminal accusation against the man who commanded the Cuban armed forces and who, even after leaving official positions, is still seen as a central figure of real power on the island. The regime tried to respond with political theater. Instead of presenting Raul Castro in public, they put allies, artists, and activists to defend the old general as if he were some kind of national grandfather. But the scene raised a question that now bothers Havana. If Raul is so strong, so protected, and so secure, why doesn't he appear clearly precisely when his name comes up so prominently in the American case? In news coverage, the act became a symbol of embarrassment because the defense came through messages, organized applause, and propaganda. Meanwhile, the ordinary Cuban watches everything, facing hunger, blackouts, long lines, and repression. Trump put the Cuban dictatorship under pressure that goes beyond just words. On May 1st, 2026, the White House announced new sanctions against officials of the regime, people connected to the security apparatus, agents involved in corruption and serious human rights violations, and material supporters of the Cuban government. The measure also paved the way to target entities and financial institutions that facilitate transactions with sanctioned individuals. For Havana, this is a sensitive blow because the regime depends on external networks, companies controlled by the military, and intermediaries to survive economically. The Treasury Department also stepped up the pressure. It created a new sanctions program related to Cuba, separate from the old rules, but added to them. OFAC itself warned that foreign individuals and financial institutions should consider the risk of sanctions when dealing with certain operations involving Cuba, especially with structures controlled by blocked persons. The most sensitive name in this game is Geisa, the business conglomerate linked to the Cuban military, which has been identified for years as a central piece of the dictatorship's economic power. Marco Rubio made the message even tougher by saying that the chance of a negotiated agreement with Cuba is not high, although Washington claims to prefer a diplomatic solution. The statement came at the same time that the United States is increasing pressure on the communist government and offering $100 million in humanitarian aid, trying to speak directly to the Cuban people and separate the population from the elite that controls Havana. Rubio also rejected the idea that Washington is engaging in nation building and stated that the issue is linked to American national security. The dictatorship feels the shock because the official narrative has always tried to sell the idea of absolute resistance, but even the Castro family itself had already been showing cracks. In April 2026, Raul Guillermo Rodriguez Castro, Raul Castro's grandson, tried to send a secret letter to Donald Trump with economic proposals, a request for sanctions relief, and a military warning, according to information attributed to the Wall Street Journal and echoed in Brazil. The detail exposes a strong contradiction. While the propaganda trumpets sovereignty to the people, within the regime's own family, someone tried to open direct talks with the White House. This move helps explain why Raul Castro's case causes so much panic. It's not just the fear of the American court, it's the fear that the historical protection of the Castro family will start to fall. For decades, the regime treated its commanders as untouchable, protected by positions, medals, speeches, and total control of information. Now, the United States indictment puts names, dates, military roles, and responsibilities into a formal process. The case of the brothers to the rescue planes, previously treated by Havana as a closed episode, returns with force and legal weight. On the streets, the tension shows up in a different way. In Antilla, in Holguin province, reports indicate protests, arrests, and a disproportionate police presence to intimidate residents. The scene described by Cubans shows officers going to pick up a person as if they were a major threat, while neighbors ask why so much force is needed to take someone who only participated in a protest. The method is an old one. First, the people shout for freedom, then the regime identifies, pressures, fines, arrests, and tries to stamp out that example to prevent the revolt from spreading. The contrast is brutal because while authorities organize rallies in support of Raul Castro, ordinary Cubans face punishment just for trying to survive. An elderly man reportedly received a fine of 32,000 pesos for selling lemons, in a scene that sums up the distance between the regime's elite and the population. On one side, protected officials, official cars, propaganda, and privileges. On the other side, people selling basic goods just to afford food, being treated as criminals by a state that controls everything but provides neither food, energy, nor freedom. The economic crisis increases the strain. Recent reports show Cuba experiencing an increasingly limited fuel market, with virtual queues, restricted monthly purchases, and gasoline reaching $12 in certain sales channels. This reality directly affects transportation, food services, and the daily lives of those who already deal with blackouts and a lack of basic products. When Trump increases external pressure and the people suffer, the dictatorship shifts blame to Washington. But people on the street see the Cuban elite keeping their privileges while the people pay the price. Havana's response also shows military nervousness. The regime tries to show readiness, move vehicles, talk about defending sovereignty, and turn any external pressure into a threat against Cuba. But this staging doesn't solve the central problem. The target now isn't the Cuban people, it's the leadership that controls power. The American pressure targets leaders, financial networks, military figures, and names linked to repression. This difference is important because it dismantles the propaganda that all punishing the regime would mean punishing the population. The Castro's fear increases because the case is not isolated. The accusation against Raul comes after sanctions, financial warnings, disputes over humanitarian aid, and increasingly direct speeches from Washington. Trump and Rubio send the message that the relationship with Cuba could change, but not as long as the dictatorship's power structure continues to block the island's future. The Cuban people already speak with less fear than before. Street reports show people asking for freedom, democracy, an end to corruption, and the right to speak without imprisonment or heavy fines. This detail shakes the foundation of the regime because the dictatorship does not survive only through the police. It also depends on fear. When citizens start to speak out loud, when they record, publish, and confront the patrol, the repressive structure has to use more force to control every neighborhood, every line, every protest, and every conversation. Now, what's happening is a test of endurance. Washington should keep putting financial pressure on the regime, targeting military networks and key leaders. Havana should increase propaganda, internal repression, and accusations against the United States to try to maintain control. The difference is that the Raul Castro case opened a wound that can't be closed with speeches. When the historic head of the military structure becomes a formal target of the United States and doesn't appear strong before his own supporters, the dictatorship starts facing double pressure. From the outside, Trump's pressure campaign. On the inside, people are tired of obeying in silence while the Castros try to save their own skin. I'm Milson Alves, global internationalist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves global community.